in the Pinal active management area groundwater user advisory council order. Today is Tuesday, January 30th, 2024. The time is 1:01 p.m. I am William Collins, chairman. Would the members please introduce yourselves? Mr. Miller.
Steve Miller, Pinal County Supervisor District.
Brian Woods, Pinal County Farmer.
Rob Riggins, member GUAC, Pinal County Agricultural Land User.
Thank you. And we have a quorum. Is Brian Hartman online?
Yes, he is.
Brian, would you acknowledge that you're here? Did you?
Yeah, he is. He'll need to unmute himself.
All right, while we wait for him to unmute himself, we do have a quorum. I'd like the EDWR staff to introduce themselves, including the members online. Start with Nick.
I'm Nick Mason. I'm the GUAC coordinator.
Melissa Sykes, the Water Management Systems Program Coordinator.
I'm Joy Rebel-O'Mara. I'm the program supervisor in the AMA.
And those online.
Good morning, not morning, afternoon, goodness. Members of the council, my name is Natalie Mast. I'm the AMA director, and I do apologize that I wasn't able to be there in person today.
I'm Colin Robenstall. I'm the statewide planning manager.
I'm Maggie Martin. I'm the drought program coordinator.
I am Amanda Overholt. I am the community water systems coordinator.
Good afternoon, Lainey Meeker, statewide program supervisor with the department.
Is Amanda Holt with you also? Overholt with you?
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, can you hear me better now?
Yes, thank you. All right. If there are any members of the audience that's interested in introducing yourself, please make your name and affiliation in the chat box. And with that, I'd like to start with the agenda item number 2, meeting logistics with Nick Mason. Nick, if you want to go ahead and review the logistics for us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everyone. Before we get started, I'd like to go over some webinar logistics. Members of the public, we ask that you please keep your phone muted during the meeting. This will help reduce audio feedback. If during the meeting you have a question, please feel free to type your question in the chat box, and they will be read and addressed at the end of each agenda item. If you would like to speak to the council, the call to the public will be the time to do so. Please indicate in the chat that you would like to speak, and we will unmute your phone. This meeting is being recorded and will be posted to ADWR's website and YouTube page once the recording is generated. Finally, if you are having any technical difficulties, please contact our help desk. Their contact information can be found on the screen. Presenters, please ask for the next slide when presenting your agenda item. Thank you. That is all, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Dave. Let's move on to item number 3, which is the management assistance program updates. Melissa, if you can care to give us an update, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon, council members and members of the public. I will be going over the Water Management Assistance Program fund balance and the status of the WMAP and DCP groundwater conservation grants. But first, I'll cover the withdrawal fee rate for 2024.
Melissa,
Yes.
are our microphones live in here? We're able to.
I don't think they are, no.
Okay. So
They were shut off because they were
you're
created.
going to need a theatrical voice.
Okay, I will please forward this.
Be expected.
Okay. Following our last discussion regarding withdrawal fee rates for 2024, the director approved the council's recommendation to remain at $3. The current balance for the WMAP fund is $189,064. Of that, $180,000 is committed, $120,000 of that for the irrigation management service. And that would leave a balance of $9,064. We expect to collect about $361,000 annually. Projects that are currently funded with the WMAP funds are the Irrigation Management Service, the Natural Resources Education Center, and the Pinal County Water Augmentation Authority. And the Pickwa project is dictated in statute to receive up to $200,000 on an annual basis. Next, I'll give an update on the groundwater conservation grant. Both projects are ongoing. The Using project-based STEM education to enhance groundwater conservation in Pinal County schools through the University of Arizona has a remaining balance of $16,681. And the leak detection equipment replacement project is back on track and has begun submitting deliverables. Before we move on, are there any questions regarding the WMAP funds or the WMAP and/or groundwater conservation projects?
Do the members have any questions for Melissa? Those particular items?
I have a question just for general knowledge. With the curtailment of CAP supplies, and we've seen groundwater extraction go up in any way to take care of some of that water that went away, or was things pretty much being pumped as hard as they could prior?
That's not something that would be under my program, but I may.
Well, it would be totally relevant to the money collected, since there's $3 an acre for regardless of it's groundwater. So, well, no, it's not at all, because it's also. So no, you're correct.
All right, Mr. Reagan stands corrected. Comments from the members? All right, Melissa, thank you.
Thank you.
It moves on to item number 4, the supply and demand assessment results. That'll be Colin, I want to try to last. Colin will be, he'll go ahead and give us his report.
Yes, hi, good afternoon. My name is Colin Wogenstall. As I mentioned, I'm the statewide planning manager for ADWR. And today I will share the results of our recently completed 2023 supply and demand assessments with you. Next slide, please. In accordance with legislation passed in 2022, ADWR is required to conduct water supply and demand assessments of each of the 51 groundwater basins in the state at least once every 5 years. At least 6 assessments must be issued by December 1st of each year. The purpose of these studies is not regulatory. These reports are intended to improve understanding of current and future water conditions in each basin and to assist statewide water planning efforts. The results of the studies may also be used by the Water Infrastructure Finance Authority to inform the distribution of funds. During the development of the reports, ADWR staff have 3 primary objectives. Number 1, assessing the volume of demand each year. Number 2, evaluating the volume of available supplies. And number 3, determining if available supplies are sufficient to meet the annual demands. Next slide, please. The supply and demand reports are structured as water budgets, which focus on total inflows and outflows at the basin scale. The reports are not groundwater models, such as those issued by the Hydrology Division of ADWR. When possible, ADWR staff utilize locally reported data or published groundwater models within the assessment calculations. However, in cases where reported data is unavailable, supplementary data from external databases and data partnerships are used. Methodologies used within the reports are developed from a mixture of internal workflows, and they also consider feedback from subject matter experts. A unique aspect of the supply and demand reports that I'd like to highlight here is the focus on the average well depth in each basin rather than the depth to bedrock. This approach allows ADWR to estimate at what point in time the amount of available water is predicted to fall below the average well depth in a basin. When this occurs, it suggests that wells have begun to go dry. ADWR staff thought this approach was worthwhile illustrates the impact of declining water levels on the existing infrastructure of property owners, residents, and other water users in the basin. The graphic illustrating the average well depth concept is shown on the left hand of this slide. Next slide, please. This slide represents the process that we use to create the water budget for each basin. All supply and demand sectors and subsectors considered within the assessment are listed here. While supplies and demands are unique to each basin, the overall process of creating a water budget is the same. Supplies and demands for the set baseline period of 1990 to 2022 are compared to determine if the inflows and outflows are balanced. Next slide, please. Once a baseline record of water use has been established for each basin, we then assess potential future impacts on water supplies using 5 projection scenarios. The projections extend water use estimates to the year 2075, and they were developed to help water planners understand different factors that could influence water supply and demands in the future. The scenarios of the 2023 supply and demand report include the status quo scenario, which maintains baseline water use throughout the projection period. Growth, which adjusts water use to account for growth within specific demand sectors. Conservation, which modifies water use under the assumption that conservation practices and programs will be adopted in specific sectors. Technology, which adjusts water use to reflect the changing dynamics of specific sectors. And climate, which projects water use under a 1 degree Fahrenheit temperature increase in the mean annual temperature. All of the scenarios are independent within these reports and only consider the modification of one variable at the time. Next slide, please. Now that I've explained the structure and the methods of the assessments, we can shift to the actual results of the assessments now. Next slide, please. For the inaugural round of basins, ADWR staff analyzed 7 groundwater basins across Arizona. There were 4 located in west central Arizona. That is the Harquahala INA, McMullen Valley, Butler Valley, and Tiger Wash. And the other 3 basins are in the southeast portion of the state. They are the Douglas AMA, the Wilcox Basin, and the San Bernardino Valley. Next slide, please. As this graph shows, the assessments revealed declines in nearly all of the groundwater basins assessed in our 2023 reports. Notably, the most significant decline was observed in the Wilcox Basin. As you can see, the groundwater storage block dropped below 0 around 2017, which suggests that available water has fallen below the average well depth in the region and that wells have begun to go dry in the basin. These findings match up with ADWR records of dry well reports that have been received since that time. Overall, several of the basins studied were determined to not have sufficient supply to meet demands. Next slide, please. This shows a breakdown of the water supplies and demands by each sector over the baseline period of 1990 to 2022. As the line on the graph illustrates, overall water storage has fallen as more water leaves the basin than is replenished. Also, of note for the basins assessed in 2023, agricultural water use accounted for the majority of demand in basins such as the Douglas AMA, the Harquahala INA, the Wilcox Basin, McMullen Valley Basin, and the Butler Valley Basin. Agricultural demand is shown as the yellow bar on the graph. Next slide, please. On this slide, I selected 2 projection scenarios to highlight. The status quo scenario is on the left-hand side and the growth scenario is on the right-hand side. For each scenario, the lines represent the total groundwater storage over time, given the projected inflows and outflows under the parameters of each projection. The colored boxes at the bottom of each graphic show the cumulative demand of each scenario from 2023 to 2075. The selected scenarios showcase the large differences that can occur due to the influence of a specific variable or influencing factor. For example, in the status quo scenario, Wilcox is expected to withdraw an additional 7.8 million acre feet between 2023 and 2075, whereas in a growth scenario with an expanded population, an increased agricultural footprint, and demand from more industrial users, that amount nearly doubles to 13.8 million acre feet. Next slide, please. With a total of 51 basins in the state that must be analyzed, completing our initial round of reports leaves us with 44 basins yet to be assessed by the end of 2027. Over the next 4 years, the team is committed to evaluating an average of 11 basins annually. To maintain that steady pace, we increased the number of basins for 2024 to 14, and these basins are shown on the map. Next slide, please. All of the information related to this project can be found on our supply and demand website on the ADWR webpage. The page has links to all the reports, the methods that we use to conduct the analysis, and it also includes our interactive data dashboard. The website can be accessed at the link included on this slide. Next slide, please. With that, I'd like to thank you for your time today. My contact information is listed here, and I'm happy to answer any questions as time permits now. If we don't have the time, please feel free to reach out to me and we will answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin. Do the members have any questions for Colin with respect to this presentation?
Yes, I do.
Mr. Riggins.
Colin, can you flip back to your methodology slide? There. Were you saying that each one of these is done, projection period is done every 5 years?
The projection period goes from the end of our baseline. So we collect baseline data from 1990 to 2022. This year it'll be 1990 to 2023. And then we apply the projection scenario out to 2075. So it looks at the whole time period from 2024 to 2075. It's not in 5-year chunks, it's just a continuous timeline. So what we do is we look at each of these independently. So we can't combine the status quo and the growth scenario projection. They're looked at independently, one at a time.
That wasn't where my interest in the question was, but so a projection period then, as defined here, is somewhere in the neighborhood of 22, 23, 24 years long.
Our projection period is 50 years.
Is 50 years.
Yes.
75. Okay. Very good. That answers my question.
Are there any other members who wish to ask a question or make a comment? I would ask the question, will the department use any of these findings to administratively implement INAs or ANAs in those areas that have been defined on the Wilcox area, basically running out of groundwater?
No, these reports are not regulatory in nature. They're designed to aid WIFA in the distribution of water augmentation funds.
Okay. But if a basin has no water and no access to augmentation resources, even through WIPA, will the department administrator take any actions?
This is Natalie Mast. The considerations for creating an INA or an AMA have different statutory criteria for what may make an area qualify to be considered for becoming an INA or an AMA. The intent of the supply and demand is not to analyze whether an area might qualify for an AMA or an INA. It's to fulfill a separate statutory obligation on the department that we analyze every basin on a 5-year rotating basis.
Agreed, but doesn't it also raise the red flag that certain basins need to be regulated because they are going to be out of the water in a very short time frame?
It might give us an indicator that we might want to look more closely at those basins and understand if there are other criteria there that might be met, but it's not by itself really an indicator of whether an area should be regulated as an AMA or an INA.
Thank you. Any other questions on this topic?
I'd like to follow up your questions directly. Natalie?
Sure.
To take the chairman's question just a bit further, I don't believe there's anywhere in the 1980 Groundwater Act that allows the department to mandate to data the inclusion of an area that's an AMA or INA. I do believe that if an area wanted to be one, there's certainly the mechanism to begin and go forward to create such a thing. But an area that absolutely did not wish to be regulated by its population, there really is nothing in the law to mandate that, is there?
So there are two processes for either an AMA or an INA and how subsequent areas might be established. One process is local initiation. For an INA, the result of a local initiation is a hearing by ADWR and a decision of the director. For an AMA, the result of local initiation is that it goes to an election, and that's what we saw in the recently established Douglas AMA. On the other side, there's also a process related to director or ADWR initiation. And in that case, ADWR does have the statutory authority to initiate proceedings to consider whether to create a subsequent AMA or INA in a given basin.
Scott, did you have any follow-up questions on that?
It doesn't get into any of the political complexities whatsoever. It isn't answered.
Thank you, Natalie. Are there any other questions or comments with respect to the supply and demand? Hearing none, let's move on to item number 5, the draft status update. And maybe Martin, you're up. Please.
Thank you, Chairman Collins. Hello, everyone. My name is Maggie Martin. I'm Drought Program Coordinator at ADWR. Thank you again for having me here today. I'm going to be providing an overview of the ADWR Drought Program and the working drought committees. And I'll finish by providing a statewide short and long-term drought status update. Next slide, please. To offer some background, ADWR's drought program was shaped by the recommendations set by the 2003 Arizona Governor's Drought Task Force. The task force developed the 2004 Drought Preparedness Operational Plan. This plan emphasizes a drought monitoring system to provide early warning of future drought conditions and proactive mitigation strategies to help reduce the impacts of drought. A key to the implementation of the drought preparedness plan was the creation of 3 structural committees. The Drought Interagency Coordinating Group, which serves as an advisory group for the state governor on the drought emergency declaration of the state. This group meets biannually. The local drought impact groups. These are typically county level drought impact groups. And lastly, the Drought Monitoring Technical Committee, which is responsible for gathering data about Arizona drought, climate, and weather. As a group, we produce drought status reports and communicate that information to land managers, policymakers, and the public. ADWR offers coordination and facilitation between each committee and stakeholders. I'm now going to be providing a little bit more information on these committees that I described, as well as summaries of their most recent meetings. Next slide, please. In 1999, a drought emergency was declared by Governor J.D. Hull, activating the state of Arizona Emergency Response and Recovery Plan and promoting aid in drought-stricken areas of the state. In 2007, the declaration was reaffirmed through an executive order further promoting water conservation in all sectors of the state, requesting assistance for those impacted, and ordering state agencies to implement their water use reduction plans. As I mentioned in the last slide, ICG is an advisory body to the governor on Arizona drought issues. This group meets twice a year to evaluate drought conditions and to consider recommendations to the governor. The ICG last met on November 7th and unanimously recommended that both drought declarations remain in place. The meeting agenda, summary, and presentations from the last ICG meeting are posted on the ADWR ICG webpage. The next meeting date has yet to be determined, but it will take place in May of this year. Next slide, please. The Drought Monitoring Technical Committee is co-chaired by the state climatologist, Erin Ann Sappel, and the lead forecaster for the National Weather Service in Phoenix, Mark O'Malley. The last drought MTC meeting took place on January 10th. Both short-term and long-term drought conditions were discussed, as well as agency updates from SRP and ADWR. We just announced that the next MTC meeting will take place on April 10th from 12 to 2. Next slide, please. The local drought impact groups, or LDIGs, are groups that coordinate drought public awareness, provide impact assessment information to local and state leaders, and implement local mitigation and response options. These groups are coordinated locally, and there is currently only one, the PIMA LDIG. Next slide, please. You can skip this slide, please. Now we'll be moving on to the statewide drought status updates. Here are the U.S. drought monitor maps for the end of the last 5 months. I will start with August, but I can't talk about August and September without mentioning July and the exceptionally hot summer that we had. July ended as the hottest July on record at most locations in the state and the second driest July on record. Precipitation from tropical system Hillary started in August. However, severe short-term drought had already advanced in many areas due to the previous 6 to 7 extremely hot weeks. After a full year of no extreme drought, extreme short-term drought started advancing through Arizona in September, which you can see here in red on the maps. Statewide temperatures were much above average in October and November. At the end of November, moderate or severe short-term drought had expanded into 50% of the state. I will get into December here on the next slide. So when we look at October, November, and December, those months ended as the 26th driest October, November, and December on record. December was the 9th warmest December statewide since 1895. Abnormally dry conditions started replacing the areas in the state with no drought. A year ago, the state had 39% moderate or severe drought. We didn't have any extreme drought, and now we're looking at 54% of the state in a moderate, severe, or extreme drought. A strong El Nino is currently reaching its peak with better than a 70% chance of neutral conditions developing by the middle of spring. As a result, there's only a slight chance precipitation will be above average through the next couple of months. The January short-term drought status map will be released during the second week of February. Next slide, please. I will now quickly cover the quarterly long-term drought status maps. The very wet monsoon season in 2022, followed by a very wet winter into March 2023, brought improvements to Arizona's long-term drought. However, extreme drought advanced throughout July to December as a result of that record-breaking July and late starting monsoon season. Exceptional long-term drought, which is that very dark maroon color, and extreme long-term drought, which is again that bright red, has expanded throughout the state. Next slide, please. Before I end, I want to quickly highlight the 2023 Arizona Drought Preparedness Annual Report that we published in December. In partnership with different groups, ADWR produces an annual drought preparedness report for Arizona residents and for the governor's office for the previous water year. The report includes a summary of Arizona's drought status for the past water year and an outlook for the next water year. That includes drought and emergency designation information and highlights of drought conditions and preparedness activities, including water supply, drought planning for community water systems, and participation in regional and national efforts. You can visit this report by visiting the ADWR Drought Program webpage. Next slide, please. And lastly, I'd like to share the different collaborative opportunities that are available to the public and interested parties, some of which are to join drought observation and reporting discussions with the MTC, form a local drought impact group, and to stay informed by joining the ADWR Drought Program email list, where we share meetings information as well as drought status report updates. Slide, please. And that concludes my presentation for today. I've included the link to the drought program webpage here and my contact information. Thank you again for having me.
Thank you, Maggie. Did the members have any questions or comments for Megan? I have one. You mentioned that with respect to the local impact groups, drought impact groups, that there's only one, and that's in Pima County. Is there,
Yes.
is there a particular reason why there aren't more than just the one?
Historically, there were more in the past, and as resources to a lot of the county establishments declined following 2008 and 2009 time period, we just saw those LDIGs sort of rapidly decline after that. So we are working to increase the amount of LDIGs, and I'd be happy to provide information if any interested parties would like to potentially initiate one.
Is there a formal process and guidelines as to how to formulate one of these?
So typically they do have a member of the county or work with the county extension like the U of A cooperative. ADWR offers support for this, but typically they do involve a member of the county.
I'm sorry, involve a member of what? Could you repeat that, please?
Sure. Typically the LDIGs do have a member of the county. And if it's not a member of the county, then they do work with the county extension like the U of A cooperative. But historically in the past, the LDIGs do have a member of the county in the group.
All right. Thank you, Maggie. Thank you, Maggie. Most appreciated.
Thank you.
All right, let's move on to item number 6, Governor's Water Policy Council update. That would be Laney Meeker. Laney, if you would, please.
Yes, good afternoon. Again, my name is Lainey Meeker. I'm the program supervisor for the statewide planning section. And today I'll be presenting on behalf of the Governor's Water Policy Council coordinator, Trent Blomberg, and we'll be providing a high-level overview of the Governor's Water Policy Council activities and the current state of their recommendations. Next slide, please. So to provide a little context, the Governor's Water Policy Council was established by executive order in January of 2023 and first met in May of 2023. The council is comprised of a diverse group of stakeholders appointed by the governor, including representatives from agriculture, water providers, tribes, executive agencies, industry conservation organizations, cities, businesses, universities, and of course, the legislature. The council is chaired and staffed by ADWR, and 2 committees were formed, the first being the Assured Water Supply Committee, and the second, the Rural Groundwater Management Committee. The council and the committees met a total of 20 times between May and November of 2023, and in November 29th of 2023, they sent 5 recommendations to the governor's office. Next slide. So the council was focused on the several different objectives. The first was to review and make recommendations for changes to the assured water supply policies, legislatively, administratively, or through executive action, which were to address the challenges revealed by the assured water supply modeling projections, while continuing to strengthen the integrity of the assured water supply program, protect consumers and aquifers, and ensure future growth is not reliant on mined groundwater. The second objective was to develop recommendations for a water management framework to assist rural Arizona communities in managing their groundwater resources. The governor's office did give the council a deadline for these recommendations by December of 2023, which, as I stated in the previous slide, they did meet. Next slide. So coming out of the first committee, the Assured Water Supply Committee, the council recommended 3 different proposals. The first was considered or called ADAS, which is the Alternative Designation to Assured Water Supply. And that was to draft new rules that would provide water providers a means to obtain a designation of assured water supply in AMAs, creating a pathway for water providers to grow incrementally on alternative supplies while reducing groundwater mining. The second was to address what is called wildcat developments. This was aimed through legislative action, which would close statutory loopholes associated with, again, wildcat subdivisions, ensuring residents of these subdivisions were brought under the protections of the Assured Water Supply Program. The third was build to rent, which through legislative action would close statutory loopholes that allow the avoidance of the Assured Water Supply Program requirements when constructing build to rent housing projects, ensuring residential lease communities are brought under the protections of the Assured Water Supply Program. Next slide. The second committee, the Rural Groundwater Management Committee, had 2 recommendations. The first was the Rural Groundwater Management Areas, which would be a foundational framework for creating rural groundwater management areas to fulfill the need for groundwater management programs in at-risk groundwater basins in rural Arizona, and would provide an opportunity for rural communities and water users to benefit from groundwater management and protection. The second was a non-regulatory program for ADWR to measure and report groundwater use and monitor groundwater conditions through the state. Next slide. So these 5 recommendations were sent to the governor's office and are now at different stages within the process. So the first, again, the Alternative Designation to Assured Water Supply, or ADAS, is currently in the pre-rulemaking phase, where ADWR is working with the governor's office on drafting rules that will then be shared through an informal stakeholder process for feedback and to gather additional feedback and insight from those key stakeholders. The second is the wildcat development, which ADWR is working with legislators to pass legislation to meet council recommendations. The third is the build to rent, which ADWR is also working with legislators to pass legislation to meet these council recommendations. The fourth, the rural groundwater management areas. The governor's office is specifically working with legislators to introduce and pass legislation that would establish RGMAs following the outlined framework from the council. And lastly, the measuring and reporting recommendation, ADWR is working on administratively by investigating areas where there are data needs throughout the state and what the options are to collect additional data in these locations. Next slide. So that concludes the presentation today. If you have any additional questions, please reach out to our council coordinator, Trent Blomberg, or I'm happy to answer any additional questions right now. I'd also encourage folks in the room to go on ADWR's website to the Governor's Water Policy Council webpage, where we have all of the meeting recordings and documents that would allow you to see kind of how the councils, the committees within the council went through this process, how their recommendations were formed through really robust dialogue and conversation, as well as what a recently released report from ADWR on the council's activities and recommendations for the year. Thank you for your time, and I can answer any questions.
Thank you, Lanny. Do the members have any questions for Lanny on the presentation? Once again, thank you, and we'll move on to item number 7, Community Water Systems Update by Amanda Overholt. Amanda, you're up.
Hello, Chairman and Council. I'm Amanda Overholt, like I mentioned before. I am the Community Water Systems Coordinator here at ADWR. I'm going to give a pretty brief overview of the Community Water Systems program here. And we will begin. Next slide, please. So what are community water systems? Community water systems are essentially any public water system that serves water to at least 25 or more year-round residents or has at least 15 service connections. A public water system is essentially just an entity that distributes or sells water under section 49.352 subsection B. There's 2 categories of community water systems. There's large and small. Large systems are just over 1,850 people, and small systems are anything less than that. Next slide. So systems outside of the AMAs, there are 2 statutory CWS reporting requirements. One is system water plans, and 2 is annual reports. So these requirements were implemented by the governor's drought task force in 2005, and these were meant to help community water system vulnerability to drought and conservation, helping them think of conservation and ensure that water providers are prepared to respond to drought or water shortage conditions. Next slide, please. Inside the active management areas, they only need to submit a system water plan. Any AMA reporting requirements are to be submitted to the AMA team, and those would include the annual reports. There are some exceptions with this. If a system is within the AMA, any AMA, and if they have only an exempt well, they do not need to submit an annual report to the active management area program. They would submit their annual reporting to me in the CWS program. Next slide, please. System water plans are due every 5 years on January 1st for all community water systems in the state, whether they're inside or outside of an AMA. Large and small systems are due on staggering years. For example, this last round, the large systems were due January 1st, 2023, and the small systems were due January 1st, 2022, and the small systems were due January 1st, 2023, excuse me. The system water plan consists of 3 parts. Part 1 is the water supply plan, which goes over their previous 5 years of water usage and their sources of water. Part 1 is the drought preparedness plan, which is how they will implement a drought, when they will implement a drought, and what their plan is during a drought. Part 3 is the water conservation plan, and that is just any way they will begin to conserve water in the future. Next slide, please. There are some exemptions for the parts within the system water plan. So community water systems with an adequate or assured water supply designation do not have to submit Part 1, the water supply plan of the system water plan, as they already do so to meet the AAWS requirements. The drought preparedness plan is not required for those that have an Arizona Corporation Commission curtailment tariff, because that is already part of their ACC plan with them as a corporation. And some systems within the AMAs are exempt because for Part 3, because they already submit conservation and have conservation requirements within the AMAs. Next slide, please. So the process for system water plans is reminder letters to submit plans are submitted 6 months or sent 6 months prior to the system water plan being due. And then the system water plan should be received on or before the due date, and a determination is made, either approved or not approved. If approved, the customer will be sent a letter of approval stating the system water plan meets the legislative requirements. If it is not approved, there will be sent a notification letter containing all of the documents, the pages that are required to meet the legislative requirements, and as well as instructions and any educational materials that are relevant. And they would need to resubmit that revision within 120 days of receiving the letter. If the system did not file a system water plan by the due date, they will receive a failure to file letter notifying the customer to submit their system water plan within 60 days. Before the end of the year, notification letters will be sent to the governing bodies of the non-compliant systems to inform them of the failure to file. Next slide, please. Annual reports are due for all systems outside of the AMAs on June 1st of every year. This also includes systems within the AMAs with exempt wells, like I mentioned prior. The parts of the annual report include water withdrawn for groundwater users, water diverted for surface water users, water received from other water systems, and water delivered to other water systems, and of course, water delivered to customers, and that section is required for all systems. There's also a section that they can inform us of their effluent use as well as their storage facilities. Water usage can be estimated if a system does not have meters. Next slide, please. For any AMA reporting questions, feel free to reach out to the AMAs. And for any community water system questions about the statutes, you can find those in 45-341 to 343. Next slide, please. And here are my contact information, my email, my phone number, and I'm open to any questions.
The members have any questions for Amanda? Mr. Carroll.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. How many of the small water systems and large water systems in totality, do you have a number that you did break it down?
Yes.
That way?
Yeah, I don't have the exact small versus large. I know we have 754 total systems. About 400 to 500 of those are small systems, and then the rest are large systems.
That 750 was the total, don't you said, approximately?
Yes. Yes,
Okay, thank you.
of course.
Any other questions? Amanda, I have a question for you. I work a small TWS that is on exempt wells. My understanding is when you're saying that they will file their annual report, correct?
Yes, so those, if they're all exempt wells, you would file with the CWS program. If you even have one non-exempt well, you would have to file all of your wells to the AMA team.
And as far as the annual report form, is that available online? Is it fillable online, or is it one that you have to do?
No, you can find the PDF forms online. on the Community Water Systems Program page. And there's also an annual report, online reporting tool that you can submit your information online.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
No problem.
Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, thank you again, Amanda, and we'll move on to item number 8, which is the AMA Director Report by Natalie. Natalie, please.
Yes, and good afternoon, everyone. So I just wanted to provide a couple really quick updates. I will just take a moment here. First update is related to staffing. I think you've probably noticed that we've got a lot of new faces. Certainly Nick, who is there in the room with you, is a new face. Nick Mason is our new GUAC coordinator. We are really excited to have him on board. Excited that this is the 5th of his first round of GUACs. So we're excited to be getting him up to speed, and you'll certainly be hearing more from him in the future. In the room here with me, and you heard from him earlier, we have Colin Wogenstall. Colin is our brand new statewide planning manager. He is responsible for the supply and demand team and also for the other statewide programs teams. So that includes drought and conservation and community water systems and rural programs and kind of a collection of various things that we track statewide. We do have some additional moving pieces. One person that I'll also note, we have Casey Allman, who just joined the department yesterday. He is our brand new supervisor for the team that is working on the processes associated with establishing the Douglas AMA and the Wallapai Valley INA. We do have a couple other vacancies. We have a few positions that we are actively working to fill. So I will make sure to provide another update on staffing at the next GUAC meeting, and I'll also plan to provide the council with an organizational chart at that time, because I know there's been a lot of shuffling over the years, and it's useful sometimes to see again where everybody is falling. The other thing that I'll note is that you've heard a lot about ADWR's activities today. From the recommendations that the Governor's Council made back in December, there are a number of bills that have been introduced at the legislature, some reflecting those recommendations, some not reflecting those recommendations. But I will say that ADWR is closely tracking the many bills at the legislature this session, and there is certainly a lot of additional workload on the department right now, both associated with all of the activities you've heard about and also with session and certainly with ongoing conversations related to the council. We are doing what we can to prioritize, but please do be patient with us as we work through kind of these many competing priorities. I am optimistic that the next time we meet, we'll be able to give you a more full update on our staffing. We'll definitely have a little bit more support. We've got a lot of stuff in the works in terms of both the types of things we're working on and how we are structuring staff to support those activities. So I'd be glad to provide another update on all of that in the future. And that's really all I have for today. I'd be glad to take any questions if there are any.
All right, thank you, Natalie. Do members have any questions for Natalie? Seeing none, thank you again, Natalie. I look forward to hearing from you next time. And this moves on to call for the council. Council members have anything they wish to comment? Hearing none. Call for the public. Is there anyone in the public who wishes to speak at this time? Either in person or online, if you raise your hand in the chat box. Hearing none, that will move us on to the final item 11, which is adjournment. And 6 p.m. First time, everybody.